Welcome to Kaidan, the Rengoku Legends, an immersive audio story series set in the haunted lands of Ikaiguchi, where cosmic horror meets Japanese mythos. This unfolding tale is shaped by you, our listeners, as we navigate through the myths and hidden horrors of this world. Beginning our journey with the option of 3 tales, your choices will transform the mysteries that unravel. Join our community on social media or Discord to become part of the legends.
Chapter 1. Beginnings. The soldier. The midday sun hung over them in a washed-out sky. The heat bore down onto Shiro like a malicious weight, thick and unrelenting. The air so thick, so humid, it felt as if he could swim through it. Sweat was beading on his brow and rolling down his neck in rivulets, soaking into his undergarments beneath the heavy layers of armor, forming a rancid swamp that cut at his joints. Each breath came labored, as if the air was attempting to drown him. Mixing with the screeching cicadas came a cacophony of screams. With blood pumping into Shiro's ears, he bellows, "Hold the line, Hatsuki!" at the Ashigaro to keep formation before slashing his blade through the lungs of a now gurgling farmer, falling on his knees. He panted, addressing the situation. Their campaign was a bloody slog up to this point. However, they had hit a turning point, and the rebels were nearly pushed back to their camps now, and he and his clan were closing in. Only a few more days. He panted to himself, grasping for his water gourd, savoring what few drops remained. As the Hatsuki pressed deeper into the heart of the rebels' territory, an unsettling transformation began to ripple through its ranks. At first, it was very perceptible, really. Few soldiers laughing a bit too heartily after his skirmish, others lingering over their slaughtered foes with a gleam in their eyes. With every step toward victory, a feverish excitement replaced the fatigue of the march. Toshiro could feel it in himself despite trying to deny the sensation, like a beast stirring within him that he couldn't quite explain. The usual grim affair of the battle was gone, replaced by a manic hunger, an itch under the skin that only blood seemed to satisfy. When they clashed with the farmers, the warriors no longer fought with honor or restraint. They tore into their enemies with wild abandon, grinning as their swords struck flesh, laughing as the rebels fell, exhilarated by the carnage. The air itself seeming to thicken, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and sweat. Soldiers began to howl before they charged, wordless cries that sounded more like beasts than men. Some of them even painted their faces with streaks of blood, as if the crimson marks transformed them into creatures of war. Toshiro noticed it too in the eyes of those they slaughtered. Manic, unintelligent eyes staring back at him with nothing but the desire, no, the need to sever flesh from bone. As victory neared, the madness only grew. Men dropped their weapons just to lunge at each other with primal viscerality, biting, clawing, tearing and gouging at any exposed flesh, all while howling and screaming in a mad frenzy. It was then that Toshiro saw her. Had he been blind to her all this time? She moved with the grace of a noblewoman, yet towered over the men, her inhumanly long odachi cleaving through Hatsuki and rebels alike, with merciless precision. To his disbelief, the battlefield seemed indifferent as she descended upon it, carving a gore-soaked path through the melee. Her dark, merciless eyes scanned the chaos, locking onto her next victims with a cold detachment. The gargantuan odachi in her 2 of her 4 hands sang through the air, its razor's edge unleashing a storm of blood and entrails. Each swing split armor, bone and flesh in fluid motions, scattering limbs and screams in her wake. The spirit moved with unnatural grace, leaving ruin behind her. Meanwhile, her other two hands held a pristine parasol, spinning idly as if she had strolled through a peaceful garden. Its untouched paper mocked the carnage beneath it, shading her terrifying poise from the chaos she wrought. Those who dared to face her met unrelenting brutality. Her blades shattered bones, splintered spines, and tore torsos apart with ease. Her dark eyes remained detached as she surveyed the bodies. That was then when whatever this thing, this creature of myth was, met Toshiro's gaze, and for the first time displayed emotion, anger. This macabre dance was not for him to witness. Deep, animal fear engulfed Toshiro as the spear began to cut its way through the battlefield towards him, for daring to witness her dance. Toshiro ran. The farmer.
The bar was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cups as Haru and his co-workers settled into their usual corner. The day's toil still clung to their faces, but the first round of drinks brought a collective sigh of relief. The air smelled of spilled sake and grilled yakitori skewers, the perfect refuge from the fields. Haru leaned back, letting the heat of his drink warm his throat as the others loosened up. "Long day," one of them muttered, shaking his head and downing a cup in one go. "Tell me about it," grumbled Jiro, the eldest of their group, his face flushed from the alcohol. "Had to pull double duty today, 'cause that damned kid didn't show up. Again." "Who, Tadashi?" Haru asked, arching a brow. "Yeah, that one," Jiro replied, voice thick with irritation. He slammed his cup down for emphasis. "Lazy brat, always whining about the work being too hard. Guess he finally decided to nap through the whole damn day." "Maybe he's sick," one of the ogre men offered, though his tone lacked conviction. "Sick of working more like," Jiro barked, eliciting a round of tired chuckles. "Kid probably ran off to avoid the harvest. He'll be back when he gets hungry enough." Haru stayed quiet at that, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. Something about it didn't sit right, but he let the conversation flow, the laughter drowning out the unease that prickled at the back of his mind. And so the night wore on. Their laughter echoed through the little bar as farmers shifted to lighter topics, poking fun at each other's clumsy work and questionable luck with women. Haru's cheeks flushed and voice slurred, joined in with uncharacteristic gusto, swaying slightly as he gestured wildly to punctuate his jokes. The cheap sake had done its work, and Haru was far past his limit, though he seemed oblivious. As the night wore on, the group began to peel off one by one, heading for their homes. Haru stumbled out into the cool night air, the crisp breeze a sharp contrast to the warm haze of the bar. He waved exaggeratedly at his friends, shouting a half-intelligible farewell as they wandered off in their own directions. The road home stretched ahead of him, long and dimly lit by the faint glow of a crescent moon. Haru hiccuped, muttering to himself as he staggered forward, the world tilting slightly under his feet. The fields on either side of the road were quiet, the rustling of the tall grass his only company, and the faint sound of cicadas humming in the distance. "Maybe I overdid it," he mumbled, chuckling to himself before tripping on a loose stone, barely catching his balance. He swayed for a moment, rubbing his head and laughing softly. "Almost 8:30 there." The road stretched on, the village lights disappearing behind him as the countryside grew darker, quieter, and more isolated. When in his drunken stupor, Haru hardly noticed. humming a tune to himself as he stumbled toward home, unaware of the shadowy unease beginning to creep into the night around him. Haru stumbled through the darkness of his yard, muttering under his breath, his head still swimming from the sake. He leaned heavily against a tree, fumbling with his sash to relieve himself. The cool night air bit at his flushed face, and the sound of cicadas filled the silence. Just as he was about to finish, a faint noise reached his ears. A low, pitiful whimper, drifting from the woods beyond his property. He froze, his senses dulled by the drink, but still sharp enough to catch the sound. It was faint, but unmistakable. It came again. A voice? Tadashi? He muttered, his brow furrowing. Anger bubbled up inside him. Was this the lazy farmhand sneaking around so late, after leaving them to pick up his slack all day? Haru grit his teeth, fastening his belt and stumbling toward the sound. Well, I swear, if that's you, you're going to get a piece of my mind, he called out, his voice slurred, but loud. There was no reply, just another faint whimper from deeper in the woods. Fueled by a mix of drunken irritation and curiosity, Haru trudged forward, pushing past the tall grass and uneven ground. His footing slipped suddenly on the edge of an embankment, and before he could react, he was sliding down, the damp earth pulling him into a chaotic tumble. He landed hard at the bottom, groaning in pain as the world spun around him. He sat up slowly, his body aching but intact, bruised and scraped, but alive. As he tried to gather himself, the sound came again, clearer this time, closer. It was unmistakably a human voice. Trembling with fear, Haru turned toward it, his irritation giving way to unease. A faint glimmer of light caught his eye, a dark opening in the mountainside, half hidden by overgrown foliage and shadows. The sound of whimpering echoed from it, faint and ghostly. Haru hesitated, his instincts urging him to turn back, but the thought of Tadashi kept him rooted. If the young man was hurt, Haru couldn't just leave him here. Tadashi? He called, stepping cautiously toward the opening. His voice echoed faintly back at him, swallowed by the cavernous hole. He heard no reply, just the soft sound of crying that chilled his drunken bravado. Swallowing hard, Haru pushed forward, brushing aside vines. He stepped into the cool, damp air of the cave. The ground beneath his feet was slick with rainwater, and the narrow passage twisted downward. Each step made him more uncertain. Damn it, kid. If you're in here, you better answer me, he shouted, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. Haru, please. I can't move. I think I've broken my leg. Haru frowned with worry. Well, hold on a second. I'll go get some help. As he turned to climb, he found his footing give way again, betrayed by his drunken legs, his feet skidding out from under him as he tumbled uncontrollably, the rocky walls grazing his arms and his legs as he slid down, the darkness swallowing him whole. He landed with a thud in the cavernous chamber, groaning as he lay sprawled on the damp stone floor. Miraculously, nothing was broken, though his body ached fiercely, bruised and scraped from the rough descent. As he sat up, wincing, his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the cracks above. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The walls of the chamber were adorned with immense, swirling patterns, carvings that seemed to dance in a dim gray light, their intricate lines flowing like rivers. They stretched upward, merging into the vaulted ceiling, forming an almost hypnotic web of symbols. The carvings depicted creatures Haru couldn't comprehend, twisted alien shapes that resembled beasts, yet were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Serpents with too many eyes, birds with flowing tendrils instead of feathers, and hulking forms that seemed to shift as he stared at them. The sheer size and detail of the carvings made his head spin, an overwhelming sense of age and power emanating from them. A faint noise jolted him from his trance, the same whimpering sound, but now it seemed to come from everywhere, reverberating through the chamber. Hello, Haru. I have so much to show you.
The scholar. You cannot unlearn how to read. This was something taught to Yurei in her first years at the monastery, to her and the other orphaned children. It was not the blades of bandits or soldiers that killed their families, but words, the systems those words built that put them here. All the teachers in this monastery were masked by a veil of symbols scrolled across cloth as they addressed them. She breathed in steadily, taking air into her lungs. Once you understand the symbology of language, it becomes a part of you, forever etched into your mind. The moment your eyes fall upon symbols arranged in patterns, your brain translates them, assigns them meaning. If I were to write teapot, and you were to see it, the image would bloom in your mind unbidden, as if summoned by some unseen force. This is the power of words, a power that binds all who understand them. Yurei began to sound out the syllables she had trained in her mind, taking care to speak them correctly. But not all words are equal. Most are gentle tools of thought that can push and manipulate people. But there exist words so ancient, so primordial, that they shape more than minds. They shape reality itself. These words, primal as they may be, are carved into the bones of the world. The wind hums them in its restless breath. The earth murmurs them in tremors and groans, and the seas sing them in the rise and fall of the tides. These are the words we learn. A silent tear ran down her cheek as bloody lines began to split apart her skin, starting at her lips where the words formed into the air. These words are not for us to speak. The human vessel is frail, a watery sack of blood barely held together with fragile skin and supported with stick-like bones easily snapped. These words care little for those who speak them, as they impart their force. This is why we impart the words in a protective phrasing, Boe no Kotaba. Beside her, another student slurred a syllable, and before they had time to react, her mouth exploded in a rush of blood as the word tore her face apart. To misspeak these protective words will allow the destructive force of the Kododama to escape without any form of restraint, like water breaking through a dam. Once it begins, it simply can't be stopped until the energy is subsided. Unerring, Yurei continued her speech despite the carnage next to her, as the faceless corpse now slumped forward with a wet splat. However, this protection won't protect you from pain. The power of these words will make their mark on you, even with the Boe no Kotaba. As such, your training, once it commences, shall be harsh, as we train each and every one of you to dictate your speech without fail, no matter what scenario you find yourself in. Harsh lines now scored into Yurei's flesh, carving intricate spirals like a sadistic torturer with a knife. Tears streaked down her face, stinging where they met the curving lines that were cutting themselves into her flesh. Another loud pop and thunderous blasts as other students failed around her, coating the walls in a bloody viscera. Those of you who succeed at the end of this arduous journey will follow us to the Tower of the Crane. Those who don't succeed shall be dead. With that, the masked teacher gestured for the young children to follow her into the main halls. Yurei finished her word. Bloody lines stopped carving through her face as she gasped, breathing in heavy sobs, now the only sound in the room as the rest of her classmates lay dead, the skin of their faces having been blown clean construct of words that they had failed to seal. When in stepped a figure clad in metallic green armored robes and a beak-like mask. Follow me.